Hello and welcome to A Sense of Centerville in Washington Township, your place for stories about ordinary and extraordinary residents and places in the Centerville and Washington Township area. I'm Susan from Centerville-Washington History, and today I have Dave McDaniel with me. Dave Warren McDaniel was born December 7th, 1938, in Portland, Indiana, a small Midwestern community. He helped with chores on the family grocery store and was interested in biology and sports. Dave played football in college, where he chose teaching as his profession. After he married, he moved to the area and met Hadley Watts, the superintendent of Centerville City Schools. He began as one of the coaches for the Centerville High School football team. Later, Dave became the principal of Centerville High School from 1973 to 2001, the longest tenure as principal. After his retirement, he joined the staff at Sinclair Community College. He and his wife, Jane, are the parents of 3 children. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you very much.
Oh, it's great to finally meet you. I've been reading about some of what you've done in these books that we have, A Great Place to Learn. This tells about the Centerville City Schools, and also another publication we have, A Sense of Community. So these books were written a while ago,
yes,
but have really fun stories about how Centerville began and the history, a little bit of Centerville and the schools. So tell me first, let's get to know you first, and then we'll talk a little bit about you being principal. So tell me about your early influences.
Well, I lived in Portland, Indiana, which is just across the line from Ohio around Fort Recovery. Grew up there for 16 years, and then we moved to Hartford City, which was just it's sort of like moving to Englewood from here, but I spent my junior and senior year of high school. I have a sister, Barbara. My grandparent and my dad owned a grocery store in town. And when I was a little guy, I spent a lot of time wanting to go to the grocery to help sack potatoes and all that sort of thing. But that was influential probably in a lot of the things that I grew up with, because I saw those 2 men, how they treated their customers and the importance they gave to each person. So Indiana was my home, and never been to Ohio much. And when I moved to Hartford City, which was a rough experience for any child that has to leave a high school after 2 years, and you have 2 left, and you're going to be toward the top of your student body, and then you just aren't there anymore. So we moved away. It was rough for a while. Not rough being I was disappointed. I did play football for the Airedales from Hartford City and also Portland Panthers. And I was never a great football player, but I enjoyed the game, and I did play some. At the end of Hartford City, what are you going to do? Well, I guess you go to college. And the thing in 1956 is when I graduated. So, it wasn't a lot of big universities were there, but kids dream. I thought I'd be a veterinarian someday, but that didn't turn out. So, the football coach said, "Why don't you go to Manchester College? We have a coach that just came from there who's over at Portland." Oh, yeah. I remember him. He was just a young guy, and that was kind of influential to me to go look at the school. So my parents, one time on a Sunday afternoon, we drove up there. We drove around this college, and it was like maybe driving around the 2-block area in Centerville now. And there was this college. It was Sunday afternoon. There was nobody around much. Some of the facilities looked different than back at our high school. And so anyway, I decided to go to Manchester. And one of the weirdo things that happened, I told you, I said I visited there on a Sunday afternoon. That was the only time I went there before the first day of football practice. So this would never happen now. But my parents, we loaded an old car I had. They loaded it up and waved goodbye. And I drove up to Manchester, and it was before college started, and there was hardly anybody around except these guys. There were some football players. And that was just after the Korean War. And some of these guys had been in the Army and were huge, absolutely huge. And here comes this scrawny-looking, 185-pound kid who's going to be on the football team. So anyway, that worked out, and I played a little bit later on, not right away, because some of these guys were they'd been in there, and they were men, and I was just a high school graduate. So anyway, we did that. During my junior year, somebody says, why don't you go out? Let's go, and I'll see if we can fix you up with somebody. So they fixed me up with a young lady from Kettering, Ohio. And from that point on, it went on and on and on. And we ended up getting married 1 week after college graduation. Kids did that in those days. They don't, of course, do that now. So we graduated from college, and the following Saturday we got married in Dayton, Ohio, on Salem Avenue. And from there, my wife and I, we didn't have much. Neither one of our parents were loaded. Her dad was a teacher, and then a principal. He was the principal at Van Buren Junior High, at that time called Junior High, in Kettering. And my dad had been in a couple jobs because of the way things turned out. And we both had, I had a sister who wanted to go, she was only 3 years behind me. And so we weren't loaded with money. So we lived in an apartment in Kettering, Victory Apartments, for 1 year, 1 room, 1 bathroom, 1 kitchen. And before, the way I got to Centerville was, I didn't know exactly what I was going to do when I was a junior in college. That's a tough time. I don't know if we give kids enough credit for how they end up. But I did know I enjoyed football. So somehow, back through Kettering, she said, well, you just get a job as a teacher. Well, I love biology, and I had majored in biology at Manchester, hoping to go into some related science. So I got a teaching certificate and came down to Centerville sometime in the spring. I can remember it was not that cold, but I applied at Oakwood, and I applied at this place called Centerville. I could have gotten the job at Oakwood. They offered me the job, but there was something in me that says, I'm not sure if this is me. And how about this other place, Centerville, which was in 1960, was a small rural town. And I went down to the Magsig building in the basement, where there was the director of personnel was. His first name Lou, and I can't remember right now on the spot, but the superintendent was Hadley Watts. And Hadley Watts he's an icon in this community. I hope no one ever forgets that. Watts Middle School is named after him, but oh my goodness, a booming person. Used to be a teacher at Kettering, and I think athletic director and football coach. I'm not sure. I didn't know him at that point. I knew him as in Centerville. So I got the job at Centerville, And as I said, we moved into that apartment in Kettering. Well, in those days, it wasn't long, there was another person coming along, and a year later, a son, Dennis, and we moved to Huber Apartments, right on 48, still there, and we lived there. That would be my second year. My wife was a teacher prospect, and she got a job at Kettering for the first year, and then as she got pregnant, we made a good decision. It was a tough decision, but you need to be with the child, and so she did. So then after 2 years, we all, like all young people, you want to get your own place. So we moved down to Centerville. It's just hard to believe this. In the area that's right across from Cross Point. It's called Willowhurst Street. And that was pretty much it. The area that's behind Klein now was just beginning to be built. So Centerville started pretty much around where the Catholic Church is, and it went south to the apartments down there. It went west to Magsig, and then you got on this road that went west, and then it went east very quickly into some farm communities. And that's the Centerville that I came to. Completely different, but wonderful people. Wonderful people. I was one of 2 assistant football coaches. And I did the line, and Roger Schultz did the ends, and the head coach was named Satkamp, Fred Satkamp. When I went to the practice the first time, I could not believe the size of these Centerville kids. They were farm kids, and they were big. There was 2 tackles that were as big as the ones I had in Manchester. And it was quite an outfit. Of the families, I can remember one of the families, Mrs. Mitchell, whose son was a tackle, used to work as a cook. And at that time, it was the high school, which is now Klein. And here's these poor young guys coming through at 22 years old, and she would pile up the potatoes and everything on my plate. I couldn't believe it. But those were the kind of people that were here. Orlo Reese owned a farm, the corner of Clio and Alex Bell, and that's up on the hill. Right there's a nursing home right now, but there wasn't any road that went back through like Clio does now. It just went straight to Bellbrook. And Orlo was a little farmer, a little guy, and he had a boy that played football. And he told me how in 1959 or 8, he was up there and they plowed up this field right by the high school and made it a football field, and there was no fence around it. So they had to do something because everybody was coming to the game, or not everybody, but I mean crowds, of small crowds. There wasn't any way. They had a rope up, and the rope kept people out without charging them. So now they put up a fence. I mean, it's just, I could go on and on and on about some of these people that made Centerville. And so I taught 7th grade science for 1 year. I taught 9th grade science for the next year. And the 3rd year, I taught biology in the high school. I was in the junior high. Things were so much different. The kids aren't any different than now, but situations were different. I couldn't believe that my classes in the 7th grade were by somebody made the decision on their intellect. So you were a 7.1 or a 7.2, and it went down to 7.6. And if you had the 7.1s or 2s, the teachers who had experience got those kids. And they put the new kids with the 7.5s and 7.6s, which were great kids. I remember that. That just floored me that anybody would do that. but they did. And so after doing biology, then the athletic director left, and they asked me if I wanted to be an athletic director as well as a football coach, assistant football coach. And there wasn't any office. I said, where am I supposed to do this? Not an athletic director at that time was in charge of the referees, in charge of the transportation, in charge of the equipment, in charge of the kids, the head coaches. You did all that. And so they said, well, we'll make an office up here in the music room. And well, it's one of the practice where a person goes in to sing or something. We'll clear one of those out and you can have your athletic office there, which I did. And then it got bigger, and Centerville started to grow. And more kids each year. And to try to skip ahead, my office became a hallway that they closed off down in Klein, to bottom of Klein, that opens up into Virginia Avenue. And then from there, I went from the athletic director full-time, and then went over to Magsig, which was across everybody knows where Magsig is, and they needed a principal. So they told me that was going to happen, so myself and some other young guys went down to Xavier in Cincinnati on Saturday morning. Went down there for a whole day and took our classes for 2 years. And that's how I got my principal certificate. Weird part about it, I was still coaching. And one thing I remember so much is that here we are on a Friday night. You took films in those days, and you took the films over. It was my job to take the film over to Valdair Films in Kettering, and you wait over there, and then they give you a can that's got the film in it. A lot of the football coaches were over there. This one guy had a heart attack right when we were waiting for this film. I'll never forget that. And what a mess that was. And so then I became an assistant principal at Magsig. And that was a different world. When I think of that now, I'm 85 years old, so I think of those steps over there, up and down the basement, up the first floor, up to the second floor. Quite a place. That place, Magsig is a building that you'd have to have a nuclear bomb to bring that down. The walls are so thick, and that was where the Centerville schools had all their kids. They didn't call it Magsig. Mm-hmm. All their kids were in that building.
So it's called Washington Township School.
Yeah.
And it had grades 1 through 12
yes.
for a long time.
And when I came to Centerville, the Klein building was not called Klein. It was called Washington Township High School. And the junior high and the high school were in the same building. The junior high was in the lower end, and that's where W.O. Klein was the principal. And the high school was at the top. The principal's name was Knopfsinger. I was at Magsig as an assistant principal. That's a tough job.
To be a middle school?
No, the principal.
Oh, the principal.
Who is in charge of discipline. That's a tough job. And so I was there for 5 years, and the opportunity came to the high school principal was leaving, and now we're up to about 1973, and Centerville decided they had to have a new high school. So that was a real battle. That's money. And having the opportunity to talk to the people, I would like to bring up one person's name who made this happen. Well, two people, really. But the one person was a guy by the name of Dick Marshall, who was a board member. And Dick made this happen because of his vision. Or we, the Centerville community, built the central unit, they call it, down at the present high school. They built the central unit. And in those days, we had so many kids. There was about 750 kids per class. It was a big school. We had just, and growing pains were all those early years. Money was a problem, just like it is now. And the more kids you get, the more teachers you get, the more money you have to spend, the more rooms you have to have, more transportation you have to have, and you have to sell that. But Dick was able to sell, and Bob Corbin was the second one, who was a legislator at this point in Columbus. And those two guys made this work. So we opened up the central unit. The kids walked, which is crazy. They walked from the south unit, which was
Klein?
Yes.
Yeah. What is now Klein?
We gave them 8 minutes to get from Klein, if you were in the back of the building, over to Magsig on the top floor. You had 8 minutes. The kids never took their coats off.
Because they were going from school
wet,
to school.
Cold, snow. Oh, I just can't believe this happened. And then the year in 73, we put the central unit in because we didn't have good physics labs. We didn't have good science labs. They were older. So we put those down at the new unit, at the new buildings. A gym that would hold all the kids. And we put them, so then we bused the kids. They would get out of class. Do you get on the South bus or you go to Magsig, or do you get on the Magsig bus to go to Central? It was difficult. And one thing that really means a lot to me today, the class of 1973, I think, just had a reunion about a week ago. And they were the last class that didn't get to go. And they had to do all this walking and transporting. They have stories. Some of the things they say, I don't even want to hear, that happened walking between Magsig and South Building. And so...
I'm sure it'd be easy to lose kids. They get distracted and go off.
I'm not sure.
A logistical nightmare.
We didn't lose them, but what they were doing between was another thing.
Yeah.
And we'd have people outside watching. The teachers would have to wear a coat and stand outside. It's crazy. Mm-hmm. And
so the reason why is you were still building the bigger high school. Yeah. So you were just trying to manage.
Yeah.
Where to put all the kids while that was happening.
That became the whole process for about 10 years. Where were we going to put all these kids? And as I said, money is always a problem. But to build a new high school takes a lot of money because you're building the facilities, home ec labs, science labs, athletic facilities, music facilities. That's different than a classroom where you can put 30 chairs or desks. So
I think the challenge now is that all the buildings are aging and there's the cost of repair.
When you think of that,
how old?
that problem today, people think that the high school's been there forever. But it was 1974, the first time students walked into part of it. 2 years later, we opened up the East Unit and the West Unit and Central. And I'm trying to think, probably about 5 years later, we opened up South Unit. And with the South Unit came some of the outside athletic facilities. So it's been there quite a while, but maybe I'm prejudiced, but I think that it looks pretty good. And they have done the community has done an outstanding job keeping it up and meeting the challenge of technology and aesthetics. I remember the story about how we got that property. There was I'm not going to use his name, but he was an eye doctor, surgeon in Dayton, lived in Centerville. He owned the property. And I'm sure he probably had a farming back or a relative or something. There were 60 acres there. So we bought the 60 acres, which was really a smart move. And to bring things up to date real quick, this farm right beside the high school, the farmer, during football games, he'd run his tractor up and down on the east side of the football field with the dust and the dirt. I think he was attendant there, but there was 65 acres there. And about 2 or 3 years ago, Centerville Schools was able to buy that 65 acres. And then they sold off 5 acres, I think, back to the township for the new fire station.
Mm-hmm. Which has just been built and is beautiful.
And that was a wonderful...
And needed.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And now, there's a lot of action at the high school. And you got as many kids as they've got, over 3,000. And, there's things that happen every day. I mean, it's physical problems, mental problems that you have to go to the doctor, the hospital, emergencies. You put 3,000 teenagers in one building. There's a lot of things. So I'm really happy that the fire department is right. That facility is right there. Can also be used as a training facility for students who are interested in that area, in the medical and the health. So that's yet to happen here. And I think soon, I believe this spring, a road will be created from the east side of the building, present building, around the back and out on Clio Road, which will allow traffic to be much better than it is now.
Kind of alleviate the people coming from the south, which is most of where the building's happening.
Well, it happens during athletic events and anytime there's an after school every day.
Yeah, yeah.
And
takes a half hour to get out of the parking lot.
But that's going to be a lot better. Mm-hmm. And the city government is working closely with the board. And I have a good feeling about that. That's going to happen. And now you've got a facility that's going to be pretty close to 100 acres. That's a big facility. So opening in the future, after I'm gone and we're gone, they can do more if they have to create some more buildings. And that's really important because one of the things I learned over these years from Kettering, my relatives were in the Kettering system working. A couple of them were administrators. I found that when they went to Fairmont East and Fairmont West, oh my gosh, what a mess that was. And if you ever go back to history, you'll find out I graduated in the real Fairmont. I graduated in the East Fairmont. And so down here in Centerville, they were trying to create, some of the board members or somebody was trying to create another high school down by Yankee Trace golf course. And they wanted to create a second high school. And I remember I just went crazy on that. And
it just divides a community.
Oh, well, how many advanced physics students do you think they have a year? This is advanced. This is not the first year of physics. Not that many. So how can you put these things at both places? The wood shop, the metal shop, the home ec area, the food service, the gym. Mm-hmm. And I saw what Kettering did, and I thought, oh, we can't do that. And so, and that shows that history shows that it didn't work up there either, because now they're back to one. But, there was a real movement here for a while to have a second high school. But what we did, we came up with what was called the unit approach, and we stole that from Kettering. And the other thing we did, which during the time I was there, we created an advisory program for students. So nowadays, still is the same way. When a student who is a middle school student leaves the 8th grade, and next year you're in high school with those big kids, the first day that you walk into that high school, the first 10 minutes, you go to an advisor. And that advisor and that group of students stays together for 4 years. And when they graduate, their advisor is involved with their graduation. And so you talk about family. That creates a family. There's where you handle the kids. That's where the discipline begins. And we had teachers at first, when we first went down there, that I didn't come here to be a counselor. I came here to teach band and blah, blah, blah. And after a year or so, they came back and told me, I'm sure happy we did this. And so that's what creates the high school as a family. You got all kinds. You got boys, girls, you got athletes, you got musicians, you got actresses, you got
academics.
Yeah, it's a real mix. There's no, because I remember how we did it. We go through 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. We did that in end of December. Told the kids where they were in about February, and then we scheduled them. So they're still doing that, so we must have done something right. And we weren't the original people that ever came up with advisory. It came out of Minnesota. I remember going up there and talking to people, but we were one of the first with a school the size that we were. So it's still there today. It's a great high school. I've been able to see our grandkids go through there, and we have 2 still left. And I've seen recently, I've watched the next to last one become a senior, and the youngest of our grandchildren is a freshman. And to watch that happen makes me feel good that we have a way to deal with this. And that's why you don't need a school that's another high school, because the labs are wonderful. The facilities are good. They are getting older. You mentioned that. That's right.
But they did add on that beautiful PAC and all of the new labs out front.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it was, but over a decade ago. But that really brought
Well, you know why we had to
updated
do that,
things.
don't you?
Well, I don't. You probably can tell me.
The plumbing
Oh, plumbing.
in the central unit, chemistry labs and physics labs were all on the second floor. And the plumbing, you couldn't do any changing because underneath of you had classrooms and leaks. I don't know how many times the plumbers would come up there in the chemistry labs and all these pipes. And plus the fact that we had advanced to now chemistry 2, and we needed more labs. So they made a wonderful decision. That was after I left. They put those labs in the front of the building, all brand new. Now they're not brand new anymore, but at least they're newer.
Yeah.
And of course, we never had a place to get everybody together except in the gym. And it's tough. You need, every once in a while, you need to see everybody in one place. But they have that new PAC Center, which is a wonderful facility. Our theater in the old days, we had people like Ralph Bender, Ken Carper, and some of those people that had to give their plays 4 or 5 times just to get people to be able to see them.
The Central Theater was what what my oldest child, that's what she had, and did their plays there. And it's a great facility as well. Now it's nice to have a bigger one and a smaller one, so you can have two things at the same time.
Yeah.
Wow, I've learned so much from listening to you today.
There is one thing I'd like to bring up, just to get to. When I first started, there were some teachers who had been here. One of them specifically, Gilbert Burruff. That name goes way back in history, so I'd say it's been the 40s, because I think he was, well, anyway, he was a math teacher. Mrs. Klein, Mrs. Brown. These were people who lived in the Centerville area, and they put me under their wing and made it work. Gil was in his 70s almost, and told me how he one time was the principal, but he wanted to be he wanted to go back to his math classroom. But those are people who were here who made Centerville what it is today. It continues to change, as we all know. The city moved out to the suburbs, and that changes things, but there's still a feeling in the Washington Township and Centerville, this is a great place to live. And I certainly believe that. I remember that's why it was very important for our kids to go here. And I think that feeling's still around. If you look at some of the awards that they've received, the elementary schools, the first year I came that summer, I came down here right after I got married. And Hadley Watts, I said, Hadley, I didn't call him Hadley. I said, Mr.
Watts.
Mr. Watts, you know if anybody I need a job this summer. I said, I just got married and I have a car and everything. He said, come over here to Stingley. We're building a new elementary school. So I went over there, and he had arranged for me to talk to the contractor. That half the building was about done. And so he says, here, you can take this steel wool and go around on the floors and scrub off or scratch off the paint and the other stuff from the steel wool with the steel wool around the bottom of the Stingley halls. And oh my gosh. But it was some money.
You're a college graduate.
Yeah.
Nothing's below you, I guess.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And so that feeling, is of community is very, very important. Mm-hmm. And I just hope in the future that the folks that live in the Centerville area, Washington Township area, feel that. And sometimes we get a little irritated in the schools because of support, and we're going through that right now. But if you look at it, the prices, when you go to the grocery, prices are unbelievable, and all of our prices, but so the same thing happens at the school. Mm-hmm. But the money doesn't change. And the one thing about Centerville is it's, in the eyes of the state, we're a wealthy district. Mm-hmm. But we're not wealthy from the standpoint of factories that are bringing in money.
We don't have a lot of industry in Centerville.
And mm-hmm. So we always come out the short end in Centerville because of that. So if the state gives out X number of percent increase, the cities get the increase, but the suburbs, and especially places like where we live, and I think it's probably around the same thing up in Columbus and down Lakota and some of those areas. It's a percentage of that, and you can't live off of that. So mm-hmm. property taxes push the schools, mm-hmm. and the volunteer support from the clubs, the booster clubs, and all that kind of stuff. So that's very important. So you go up and down. We've been through all that.
Let's focus a little bit more on your principal years. So
Okay.
the years that you were principal, and that was the longest of any Centerville president. So I'm sure there were ups and downs. I'm sure there were good things and bad things. What are the experiences that stand out that you'd like to kind of remember and record? And I want to add that I appreciate that you're sharing specific names, because the people whose names that you mentioned, you might be the only person that remembers them, so that they're recorded here.
That bothers me.
Yeah. So, now those are people who have been remembered, and they deserve to be remembered.
Yes, right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
C.L. Stingley. His picture's in the trophy case over there at that building, but C.L. Stingley was a superintendent here before Watts. He was a principal when the show was just in one building. So there's people like that. Well, who was C.L. Stingley? Who was Hadley Watts? I'll never forget that as soon as I took the job as the principal, Knopfsinger, who at one point was the high school principal, but later became the principal at the new Stingley Elementary, he called me aside and said, "Well, Dave," he said, "good luck." He says, "We've never had a principal that lasted over 4 years." I looked at him and I thought, "What?" He says, "Yeah." He says, "Good luck. You'll find something. Maybe it'll work out." Well, who knows? Here I am finishing up 24 years, People think that's crazy, but there's one reason why it worked. I love the kids. And right now, it used to be we'd go to the Dayton Mall, my wife and I, and we'd be down. You saw that this morning with this young man that was in here.
Well, we came in to record today. There was one of the previous students that recognized Mr. McDaniel and said, "I was really glad I didn't have to come to your office."
Yeah, they always think that. Craziest things. Kids become adults and they remember those things. Mm-hmm. But I'm honest when I say this. I don't remember those things. Mm-hmm. I remember some of the extreme ones. But I remember the good things. I remember the positive kids. We've had such wonderful kids and parents go through this area. And so 24 years of being a high school principal, I know that's kind of long. But those were great years. Sometimes people ask me, "Well, what was the hardest part?" I hate to even say this, but the hardest part were the parents. And because if your child does something wrong and you see that and you know that happened and they get disciplined, sometimes the parents don't agree with you. And so that's why as the years went on and on, you see the lawyers more often. The school attorney is on your side, but you see him more often. The first few years, I didn't even know we had a school attorney. But those things happen. But the kids, even they make mistakes. If they make big mistakes, they're kids, and you start to feel differently about it. A good principal, and I'll say that's the way they think. It's for the kids. Mm-hmm. And you try to do everything you can to make it work. And it's difficult sometimes. But so I was able to stay there. I had an opportunity. In fact, I even applied for a position in the central office one time. I'm so glad I didn't get that. But I stayed where I was, and I was able to work and build the high school the way it is. I know that sounds very egotistical, but I was able to influence and work with the central office and the Board of Education. We've had many good boards of education. And There's a couple people there now on the board that I hope that when they retire from the board, the community will just overflow with gratitude. And those two people were, I don't think I should mention their names, but they think of kids, and they're so influential. They're ready to go to battle to help the kids. And I'm sure there's some new people and all that kind of stuff, but people need to think about those things. This doesn't happen overnight. We're dealing with millions of dollars, millions, and mistakes. And you just look around of our government now in this country, we're certainly familiar with problems and mistakes. But these board members get pittance. They may get some of their expenses paid for.
It's a gift to the community, really.
Yes.
And I think what you said was really interesting, that sometimes when you have a big section of time to devote to something, you can kind of play out your arc. Versus if you just have a short time, you can't maybe do as much with. And so that's
you're always looking for the next best thing. You're forgetting what you're doing presently.
Right. I want to just reiterate what you said. I loved the kids. And that is so important when you are a principal or a teacher, to have a place where kids can go that they're cherished, that you can make mistakes and you're still acceptable.
Well, just recently, the day we voted, I walked through the polls, and this gentleman, who I didn't recognize, "Whoa, aren't your name McDaniel?" Yeah. "Well, my children went to the school." "Oh," I said, "well, that's good, And that brings me to another little story I'll tell you in a second. But he said, "Well, thank you very much." And they always want to tell me what their kids are doing, which are, some of them are big-time jobs. And he says, "I just want to thank you for what you said at orientation in freshman year." Of course, I didn't know what I said. And now, I said, "Well, what did I say?" "Well, we sat there scared to death because our child was coming to that big school, a big high school, with all these people that are older and all the things that they have to problem." And he said, "You said, I will take your kids when they're children, and they will leave as adults." And that really meant something to me, because that's really what happens. You see these little middle school kids come through, and they're just so immature, so naive. And when you see them leave 4 years later at graduation, going into, some of them to the service, most of them to college, you see adults. And so you can't do that if you're there, as you mentioned, a year or two. But somehow I'm crazy enough to enjoy that. And that's what makes it real important.
I think it's interesting that you had a difficult high school experience. I had a similar, where I went to several different high schools. But because I think that you had that challenging high school experience, maybe you were more compassionate with those kids at that age, because you had to...
I never thought about it that way.
Yeah.
But it wasn't much fun in September at that high school, which were big rivals with where I went before.
And you're going to the rivalry.
Yeah, and here comes this little kid that's, the girlfriends and boyfriends were already decided,
Yeah, it's not...
You're right. That's a tough, and then the opposite thing happens at Centerville a lot of times. A few years ago, when all the companies, Delco and all these big factories were going full swing, we would get a lot of kids that came from Flint and the suburbs of Flint, Michigan, because of the companies, General Motors. And I would try to go overboard to make those parents feel accepted. And I know that paid off. I've heard that. And because when a kid comes to you, they're scared to death. They don't know anybody.
Even if they don't seem scared.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
They have good fronts.
Yeah, we all do.
Yeah.
I want to make sure we get to this story because this was not one that I had recognized that you brought with you today. Can you tell about this sharing freedom in 1991? And I'll actually hold it up, and then I'll show the picture that's inside. Go ahead and tell about that.
Well, we were one of the first schools because we had a new high school, and we tried to be innovative, and we did well. We were supported. But we heard about this Channel 1. And Channel 1 was a concept where they would have a broadcast every morning for the news. And so we incorporated that. They bought the televisions. They paid for the hookups. And every advisor then had Channel 1 in their advisory. And they were short. They weren't long-winded things. But it was the same group. They had kids that were the kids. They had adults, young people that were the broadcasters and blah, blah, blah. But every day it was current. What happened the night before over in Europe or whatever it was. So Channel 1 was in our school, and we really pushed that. And sometimes some of the teachers felt it was on one side or the other, and they were on the other side, but it always came around. So we got a call one time. Would you be interested in coming up with a program, or we would come up with a program where we'd have an interface with Russia? Well, that took me a couple minutes to think about. Russia? How could that happen? And so we ventured into it, got correspondence, meetings, blah, blah, blah. And Tom Brokaw was going to be the person who was the commentator or the person at the program. And we want it in your building. Oh. So one thing led to another. So we selected a cross-section of students because we could only fit about 400 in the old theater, a cross-section of students and teachers, a few teachers, to participate in the program, but we hooked up the program so that it could be in every, of course they did this, in every Channel 1. It went all over the United States. So we had a Russian teacher at that point, Mrs. Druktinas, who really kind of helped. And she was able to speak with some of the people in Russia. And so we had this program set up where the Brokaw was going to talk about things like music. What kind of music do they listen to in Russia? Do you have sports? Centerville, what's this kid wearing this leather jacket for? What's that on the front of his jacket? Do you have plays? And then they got into history, a little bit of the countries. He hit on a lot of things. He led us into that. Now that I think about it, he led us through the Second World War and how we were allies, blah, blah, blah. And then he got into the nuclear mess. He was trying to show that it takes, in a whole world, you got to be at peace. And you have to work together. That was the goal they were trying to do. So as we went along, that's what he told us he was going to do. He was going to lead. There was another lady by the name of Cindy Samuels who was going to be kind of his director. We met with her. So here they come. It comes the date, and we never dreamed that the whole parking lot on the west side of the building, all of it. Teachers' lots, a whole lot, which is now an athletic lot, was filled with semis. And these semis had big satellites.
I'll show the picture of that.
And these satellite trucks and the people came in like a day or 1 day early and started working right during the school day, pulling cables down the hall, big cables like you see in here, kind of. And all this stuff was being set up. Of course, the kids, we tried to explain to the kids, this is important. Don't trip over anything. You know, be good elks because we had people in the building we didn't even know.
It would never happen now.
Oh, no.
Safety.
I agree with you. Yeah. It wouldn't. And all kinds of looking people. They came from one of the coasts, East Coast, I suppose. Mm-hmm. So we're set up, and we knew what time it was going to be. And they wanted some music. So they wanted some of our kids, what kind of music, rock stuff. So we had a little band that played. So then we start the program. We get the kids down. It goes on the air. And here are these faces from Russia right in front of us. And they were doing the same thing our kids. They were looking and teeing and all this. It's just, kids are kids.
It's so weird because, like, for us now, where we can access across the world so easily, but back then, that was so unusual.
Oh, yeah. We didn't even have to, because there was nothing like cell phones.
Yeah.
So here were these Russian kids, and each one of them, we had certain people we were to ask questions, and they had certain people to ask questions. We had interpreters, and not we, but the company had interpreters. And so we put on that program, and everybody in the school was in their advisory watching this on the program, knowing it was just happening either downstairs or down the hall. And so that was quite an event. It's unbelievable. I don't know. I'm sure we would, something similar would happen. They would do it today, but.
And this was broadcast throughout the whole United States. Yeah. This interview between the kids in Centerville and the kids in Moscow.
Yes, and they were this was in 1971, I think. And, 71, that's long. But it's not, people didn't have all the technology naturally. Mm-hmm. So it was quite a business. And we had our Centerville mayor was involved.
Yeah, there's actually a picture there of Tom Brokaw and Shirley Hines and you as well.
So it was, after it was over, Tom wanted to have a luncheon. Mm-hmm. So we went to the luncheon and down in the choir room. And he was just a normal guy thanking us for all the everything we did and blah, blah, blah. And he was just a normal person. But he was the voice of TV at that point.
Yeah, I mean, that's the news program that we used to listen to.
Yeah.
So
that was one of the highlights. Mm-hmm. There's another highlight that just the opposite of that, 1,000 miles difference. When I was over in the Klein building, spring, May, all of a sudden the fire alarm goes off. And of course, that's a mess. So everybody goes outside, and we couldn't figure out, here's where it pulled, right here by the door of the Klein. So I go outside and was looking around, and across the street was this kid who I couldn't hear what he said, but he gave me a signal with his middle finger as he ran away.
Oh, no.
Well, that was the last I've ever seen him. I saw him, except about 4 years later, somebody tapped me on the shoulder at the school. It was the same kid. He had a military uniform on, all fully dress uniform. And he says, I just want to apologize for what I did. And that was really meaningful, because here you got this kid who's trying to create a big problem, and here he is serving his country. And we've had some other kids that a lot of people probably heard this name before. Sonny Younger, who was a star football player for Centerville in the old days. And he was in Vietnam, and knowing Sonny, he would not back down, and so he was at a platoon leader in an ambush. And it's noted more than once, they were surrounded by hundreds of people and the Viet Cong. And Sonny called in the Air Force to fire right where they were in the middle. And they did. The Air Force came in, killed everybody, several hundred. But here's a guy who played football at Centerville, a kid, now an adult, who we said during the Jefferson game in those days, Montgomery County League, Sonny, can you play the second half? I know your leg is killing you. I know you got trouble. Dr. Archdeacon, who used to be one of the only doctor, Dr. Black, says he'll give you some pills or something here to get you through. And he said, okay. So we did that. Sonny came back second half, and he was a fullback, and we won the game. But here, the point I'm making is, in education, everybody's been through this. You get these little kids, then they become middle schoolers, like, oh, brother, they're halfway there and halfway back, blah, blah, blah. Then you get them to high school, and they turn into adults. And we've had so many good leaders, so many economic presidents, it's company presidents, and we've had good workers. The problem now, they're all retiring, and I'm still around, And so those are positive things, but the point I'm trying to make is people have to understand that these things don't come automatically. They do not. And only because of their gifts and their willingness to support. And I know a lot of people get upset on little dinky things, but I'll guarantee you that the educators are not doing these things on purpose to give them a hard time. They're trying to make them better. So the process of administration, working with the teachers, and we've had so many wonderful, wonderful teachers that are so talented, so caring. But now I go back to the high school, and I look around, and I've only seen two people that are still there when I was there.
Yeah.
And one of them is from a family that was here before I even came to Centerville, the Turton family.
Yeah, I had them on this program.
Oh, did you?
I did. The Turtons.
The Turtons.
And their son Matthew was two of my kids' advisors. So that advisor program.
That's neat.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
But they were here before I was here.
Yeah.
And they go back too. And but that was a strong family. Still is.
Yep.
But there's people. What I'm trying to say is this goes on. And here we are in 23, and in 30, 35, there's going to be a Centerville High School, I hope. And we need to support this endeavor. And we're so fortunate where we live.
We are. I wanted to go back to that young man that pulled the fire alarm.
Yeah.
And that he came back to tell you. And what it reminds me of is that anyone can change.
Yeah.
Even the most troublesome youth, you don't know what their future holds. They could change, and we have to allow people that opportunity to change and become better. And that's
Well, that's the blessings that I have received, just what you just said.
Mm.
It's easy to remember the people who are valedictorian
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and who were the star of the basketball or football team. But those young people who you see every day, and you don't know how important it is to receive, "Hi, Mr. McDaniel, how you doing today?" Some people say, "Oh, that's nothing." Oh, yes, it is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it's important for all of us to do the same thing with other people.
Mm-hmm.
And
Give them some grace.
yes.
Yeah, we all need a little bit of that.
Yeah.
Well, is there any last things that you want to share?
Oh, there's lots of stories. They go on.
I know
and
we
on.
could go on and on.
I know. We've had wonderful times in all the programs. I'll never forget Fiddler on the Roof. Ralph Bender did. It was unbelievable production.
Mm-hmm.
I remember our football programs, our basketball programs. We've got to the state finals in football one time. We've had some great coaches. Bob Gregg was here for years. A good football coach that was here before he was Dale Lindsay. Mm-hmm. None of them are around anymore. Everybody's gone. We've had some math teachers that stayed with those kids. Dale Griesmeyer, Rollin Young, still cooking. But we've had people like that who, they just represent other teachers. There are so many, Ruth Engelmeyer, and yearbooks, and
Mm-hmm.
people who put their lives on the line,
Mm-hmm.
worked nights, come up and were not getting paid to do these things. But they love kids.
Mm-hmm.
And thank God there's people like that. Otherwise, what would we have? If we all became adults right away, and then you don't have a chance to learn these things. We started the career education program. I feel very strongly about that. That's why I went to Sinclair. I didn't think I was going to work anymore. I was done. And then Ned Sifferlin called me one time about 2 months later and said, "Come down and see me. I want to talk to you." And I couldn't figure out what I did. I did something wrong, probably.
You thought you were going to get in trouble.
Yeah, just like the kids. And he wanted me to take a program that they were having trouble with and try to change it. And I told him I'd think about it, but it didn't sound good to me, which I won't go into. But it wasn't me. It wasn't me. I think that's another thing people need to think about. Sometimes you're asked to do something that's not you. So say no, mm-hmm. and go to what you want to do. And so they called back a month later. He says, "I got something else I'd like to talk to you about," which I did. And we started a tech prep program. We had done some of that on our own.
This was with Sinclair.
Well, the high school started it.
Okay, all right.
And there was some very small amount going on. But then Sinclair got into it, and they really have done a wonderful job. Anybody who's in these career education programs now, junior and senior year, finishes up with a recommendation from their teacher, which is most of them. They're able to go to Sinclair without any charge and get into their programs. And from Sinclair's program now, and this is some things I worked on when I was there, We have affiliation then with the University of Dayton, Wright State University. They can go on now to Ohio State, and they credits follow them up. And that's a program at Centerville that's very, very important. And I pushed that a lot because everybody was supposed to go to college. That is not going to work. College is not for everybody, but hard work is for everybody. And if
everyone needs a way to earn a living.
That's right. These people in this room right here that run all this camera equipment, they need training. They need all this stuff, but they don't maybe have to have a BS degree from Ohio State or something to do this. So we got that started, and I feel it's going very strongly right now. The administration at Sinclair has been very positive. In fact, I really felt good when I went down when the church, was it Clio?
Yeah, it's Clio. Yeah, it's
and
now,
that now is
Sinclair.
a Sinclair
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
place that you can go for college right here in Centerville.
Yeah.
And that is so important. And if kids just, they can do that and then maybe go to college after they're started because they're more mature.
More maturity, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And they're doing this. And now it's fun to watch the papers, and they're talking about drones and airplanes and all this. Oh, my goodness.
So many good things.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much to do.
Yeah.
Oh, but I would really love to end on you talking about what you've done since retirement, because that's what you were very passionate about talking about when I was.
Well, I don't know, passionate. You're pushing that one, but it was different.
Okay.
When I was a young guy in 8th grade, 7th grade to 11th grade, one of my good friends was a farm boy. And I went out to his farm, which was right at the edge of Portland, Indiana, first farm outside the city limits. And I loved to be out there because of the animals and the machines. And his dad was such a wonderful person. I claim him as my second dad. But Clarence took me under his wing, told me so much that I've learned, little things just little dinky things, but they surface the rest of your life. So I really got a sweet taste for agriculture. But, of course, a city kid, kids can't go get a farm. So when we moved, I drove back and forth on the weekends to this guy's house. And they really were wonderful to me. And so I had a sweet taste for tractors. And I knew a little bit about it because I'd used them, and I knew what the problems were. But I didn't know anything about the mechanics. So now I'm old, and my neighbor, who just moved away, was an engineer at Delco, but his family was from West Alexander. And he kept his knowledge, and he said, why don't we get a couple tractors and restore them? I said, well, okay. I kind of enjoyed that. Maybe, I thought, here I am with nothing to do. Well, my wife wouldn't say that, but something to do. And so, long and short, we started working on tractors. And we would tear them down. He did a hard mechanical work, and I worked along with him, learned so much. And then we sanded them and restored them. And presently, he just moved away to Georgia with his family. And my son got into it too because Dad did it. Now his son's into it, and there's 3 of us. I'm just kind of the watcher now. But we have 7 tractors. They're out in a place around West Alley because you can't afford a barn around here. And so we go out and we work on them and get them to run, and we put them in parades and take them to tractor shows. It's something that relaxes.
Yeah, it's cathartic, maybe.
Yeah,
maybe.
It's something. I'm around those tractors, I feel great. And we've been and they're dirty. You have to, and that it's that's what we've got now. I've got, for the public, you wouldn't know the names of them, but I have an orange one and 3 red ones, and my friend's got a green one and one that's about a cream color. So we got all these things, and so once a week I try to go out there. And there's one thing I have to tell you that it's not, but I have to have my easy chair.
So you have an easy chair near your tractors.
So I've got one of those that sit out in the barn with, and this isn't a barn, it's a big garage, but it looks like we call it a barn. Mm-hmm. Sit in there and look at those tractors and think, I think I need to change the oil on that one. Or maybe I need to get a new part for the back side of this WD or something like that. And my first tractor I purchased right here in Centerville, right off of Clio Road. It was called the Weller Egg Farm at that point. It's not too many. Now there's a housing development right there.
Right. But our president lives in that house, the Ida Weller farmhouse.
Who?
The president of Centerville-Washington history.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it's a special house.
We used to drive over there and get eggs.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember my wife and I we'd go over there, and that's where we got our eggs. And so when they sold out, and whatever happened, the Weller, Mrs. Weller was still living, I think. Mm-hmm. And they were going to have an auction. And so my grandson at that point was only in the 7th grade or 8th grade. And he says, Grandpa, they're going to have an auction over there, and we need to go to that. And I said, well, why? We need to buy a tractor. So the auction came.
That's how it began.
Yeah, the auction came along. And so I'm in Washington, D.C. at a conference, and I'm one of the speakers at this conference on career tech. The phone rings. And that's when you had those cell phones that are, I don't know, they're pretty good, like half a suitcase. And Grandpa, we want to buy this Alice Chalmers. And I said, well, is your dad with you? Yes. Well, I said, tell him to use his good sense and buy it. I'll help pay for it. So here I am up there. It's the craziest thing. Here I am in Washington at one of those big hotels. I can't remember now. At this conference, I'm getting ready to make a presentation, and my grandson is telling me they want to buy this tractor. So when it was all over, they bought the and guess who bought the other one? Turton. But there were two Alice Chalmers. He bought the other one. I wish I'd have bought it now. But so they brought this old rusty thing over to our house, and I drove it from Centerville on the roads. That's, of course, I didn't go the interstates. On the back roads, clear over to the Preble County line. And here it is. And I thought to myself, and of course my wife she was behind me in the car, worried somebody's going to run over me. But I thought to myself, here you are, working with kids, and I was still a principal, working with kids, doing all this stuff. People think, oh, you got this principal BS. And then here I am on this old rusty tractor going down the highway, and I made it, and then we redid it, and now it's beautiful. But it's been a very pleasant experience, and it's just what I got into.
It's fun that you can do it with your son and your grandson. That's
Yeah.
something that you can share together.
Well, my grandson's much better than I am.
Well, he probably has more energy than you do, too.
Yes, yeah, a lot of muscle in that. Some of those pieces are pretty heavy, but
Being young is a great thing.
yes, it is.
All right. Well, this has been so fun. Thank you so much for being here today. It was delightful recording these stories with you.
Well, I enjoyed it, and thanks to all the kids and the parents that have been a part of my life, a part of Centerville High School, and a part of the Centerville community. You got to realize, folks, you're very, very fortunate. So hopefully you will step up and support, whether it's the bazaar at the church or whether it's going to the Stubbs Park or whatever it is. Just take part of it. Don't back down.
Be involved.
Yeah.
And help our community be great. And also thanks to MVCC for allowing us to use their space. If you have an interesting story about Centerville or Washington Township, please contact Centerville Washington History. Please also come visit our museums in Uptown Centerville, Tuesday through Friday, 12 o'clock to 4 p.m. And follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and check out our website for more events. See ya. Goodbye.